everyone. My name is Shamillah Wilson. I am a feminist coach and process architect. Welcome to my conversation series. Today I am speaking to Muhadi and we are speaking about resilience. Muhadi, why don't you introduce yourself?
So I'm Muhadi Muhadi and I am a magician, but professionally I'm known for filmmaking in the arts of motion. I do camera and editing, but I also do some other non-shown creative things. Yeah.
I'm so curious about all of those things. Particularly the magician part. Like why the word magician? I'm very curious about that.
I honestly think a lot of the things I know now have been self-taught, not necessarily like, oh, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are your steps. Do that, and this is how it'll reflect. I just kind of figured out a lot of the things that I know now, and I think for me that is the magic of being human, making something out of nothing. And yeah,
I absolutely love that for you.
thank you.
So we're talking about resilience today. What does resilience mean to you?
Resilience to me, Sham, means core strength. I really have a bad core, so I'm really trying to work on building that up if we're going to use an analogy for it. But it also means discovering, I think I'm really into this exercise analogy, discovering muscles that you have that were not used. Yeah.
I like that, but I want to take us in a little bit of a different direction.
Take us.
You know, the thing with resilience, I'm just thinking about, like, as somebody that is a person of color in South Africa, however we want to call that, a colored woman, a black woman, whoever feels comfortable with whatever kind of identification. I feel like being somebody that lives in a non-white body, often there is more pressure on us to be able, like, so when I think about resilience, I think about this bouncing back, right? Like this kind of like thing of bouncing back.
Yep.
And I feel like in my experience growing up, like now I feel like, yes, I can identify with your very neatly kind of like core muscle analogy. I love that. But I think like there was a period where I was really angry about the fact that there was just so much more pressure to carry more and to be able to come back from, I think, certain setbacks in life. Like, did you have any of those experiences?
Absolutely. I think touching back on what you mentioned, existing in a non-white body, it for me was very evident starting school. So I've mentioned this in this documentary we made. I went to Model C school, you know, we're a mixed bunch of kids, but even amongst the black group of kids, I still felt isolated because I'm of a minority, you know. So my background is Bavenda, and Venda people back then for me were not as visible as they are now. And so I felt that I had to assimilate to everybody else, learn everyone's language, to be understood, to be able to communicate. And so that for me really stretched me as a person. Obviously, I was in this learning space and I could grasp everything. So my resilience began then, having to accommodate everyone, you know, and not feel accommodated or considered in those type of spaces.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that. Like, I think growing up, I didn't necessarily think the resilience skills that I were activating, that muscle, as you were talking about, was something that I was doing. I was just doing it, right? Because I think one of the things I learned is that there's this philosopher called Heidegger, and he talks about this thing called thrownness, right? So thrownness is where, like, none of us choose where we are thrown, like essentially into this world. You don't choose your culture, your gender, your family background, your economic status, your race, or anything. So we are thrown into the world, essentially, right? So Heidegger talks about this. So thrownness is when you are thrown into this world. We don't get to choose where we are thrown. But the first thing we need to do when we are thrown into this world, we have to figure out how to survive, right? And that's kind of where our first resilient muscles are formed, right? You kind of have to adapt to the culture, to the language, you have to adapt to your environment. And essentially, like if you think also in terms of the psychological theories, right, where they say a child needs to survive to get attention as well.
Yep.
So I think we kind of figure out early on what it is that we need to, like, you know, to belong, to feel safe, to be okay in our environment. But the thing I think that most of us figure out, like Heidegger says, that most of us are so preoccupied with why were we thrown there, and he says that that's not really the question. The question is, well, what do we do with being thrown there, right? And Einstein says this. He says that, you know, the thing is in life, you learn the rules of life, not in order to obey the rules, but to kind of figure out how to use the rules to your advantage. Anyway, that's my interpretation. So coming back to the resilience piece, I think like early on in life, I also figured out like, okay, what do I need to survive? What do I need to feel seen? What do I need to feel accepted, to feel that I have a sense of belonging? And what do I need to be okay in the world? And I think, like, you know, the place where I was thrown in, I lived in a working class neighborhood in Cape Town. The Cape Flats, like, you know, was known for gangsterism. And the things that I learned how to navigate that space, it was so unconscious, I just did it. And like later on, I was like, oh, the reason you covered, like I used to wear the most horrible clothes. My father worked in a clothing factory and he couldn't understand like why I had no fashion sense. For him, it was like, you have no fashion sense. And like later on, I realized it was, I needed to mask my body because like the male gaze in that environment was so harsh. And it constantly made me feel objectified. And so the only way I did it was I would wear like a pants and a skirt and another thing over it. And that was how I masked my body, because I could see what was happening around me.
Absolutely.
So I think for me, those were some of my early experiences of like resilience, like muscle building, right? Do you want to share some of yours?
I relate so much in masking your body, especially when it came to transitioning from high school to varsity, where now you're out of this uniform and you kind of have to, I don't know, identify with a look.
Yeah.
And so commuting for me, I use taxis, and so going to the taxi rank was a nightmare. Like every step of the way, you're getting catcalled.
Oh my word.
People are looking at you, obviously sexualizing you, and that was a very uncomfortable experience. And so I went into this part of my life where I was just wearing baggy clothes and like baggy shirts, baggy pants. And my mom, she was very worried, like, what's going on with you? And coming from a conservative home as well, it was like, women and girls don't dress like this. So what is this shift? What is this change? And obviously, you know, in the home, we're not given the space to communicate what that is, or like parents are not taught to communicate to their kids about certain things that they would like to find out. And so there were just a bunch of assumptions made at home, but now I have to also deal with my reality, like, okay, this is why I'm dressing like this. Even though I think it's cool, it's also a layer of masking my body, because I don't want to present as this way in this environment. And so, it was, I think I came a long way from having to accept another layer of that choice of wardrobe as a part of my identity as well, because that's when I was discovering my queerness and challenging, you know, what masculine looks like on me, what feminine looks like on me. And Yeah, there's just so many layers when it comes to the body, when it comes to presentation, when it comes to your lived experience as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think just like listening to you and thinking about my own experience, I feel like a lot of then our resilience wasn't necessarily our choice, right? It was defined by an existing system. And I think that's kind of sometimes I get triggered by this piece where people are like, how resilient are you? And I get triggered by it because I feel like, because I feel the injustice of it, right? Like there are some of us that have had to do more to be resilient than others. And I guess it's always important for me to assert that, right? Because I don't want people to take it for granted. Like, so like in today, like, you know, I do coaching, and so when I coach somebody that is really hard on themselves, I'm like, there is nothing wrong with you, because I think we internalize, right? When I'm not able to take care of myself, when I'm not able to, you know, I've had a setback and I'm not able to bounce back as quickly as society or, you know, the environment tells me I'm supposed to. And I think even now, like a lot of people that I speak to still struggle to acknowledge, listen, I have mental health challenges. I'm depressed, I'm on antidepressants. Like we still struggle with that. So I think for me, just naming these things is almost like a political act of saying that I don't want us to valorize ourselves for saying, oh, I am so resilient, because in the process that makes another person feel that they are not doing as great, because it kind of triggers that competitive idea, right? Like
and
that
worthiness.
the worthiness, like I'm not good enough, I'm not doing good enough, and I don't have what you have. So that competitiveness that the neoliberal system kind of triggers in us, right? Like, oh, you need to have all these things to show that you are worthy, a valid, and or somebody that's doing okay in the world. So I mean, I guess going forward from that, like what would you then say now, like for you resilience means? Because I'm also all for creating our own narrative, because I feel like so much of well-being and resilience, that narrative gets imposed on us by a system, whether it's capitalist, whether it's neoliberal, that wants to tell us certain things about what it means to be resilient. So what does it mean for you now?
I think I've had to definitely mentally reframe what resilience means, because it just means, for me, existing in a black body just means you have to keep going and not rest, and, you know, not give yourself the chance to crumble. And so for me it now means just let yourself crumble if you have to, because it's necessary for you to let go in that way. And
I love that. So there is power in vulnerability.
Absolutely.
And instead of crafting vulnerability as weakness, you're kind of claiming vulnerability as your power.
Yeah, I think you get to discover a lot more of how you want to operate in the world, instead of continuing headstrong and thinking, okay, surviving is winning. For me, surviving is a big loss, actually. So crumbling and breaking yourself open, I think, gives a lot more room for different possibilities, creative solutions, and not having to follow a specific blueprint because this person that looks like you had to do this. And so you might have to do that as well.
I also like what you're saying, because it's saying that there isn't one particular definition that applies to all of us. And also, I think for myself personally, I am realizing that it changes all the time. Like what I might have defined as my resilience last year is not what I think now.
What is it now?
Now I think it is about acknowledging, I'm going to say something now that was difficult for me to acknowledge, like that I'm getting older.
We probably need to hear this right now.
Yeah.
We definitely need to know.
And the you know, so the things that I value the most in my life, I value independence, I value my autonomy, I value my power. I have a lot of power. I value that a lot. And like with age comes this idea that um, that is changing. That power is changing. My own vitality is changing. My relationship to my body is changing all the time. And I'm kind of like it's a journey. Like I'm still in that process of trying to accept it. And interestingly enough, like, you know, moving to Joburg was part of that, like, you know, accepting that that for myself, like making, like the first part was when I accepted that there was a time in my life where I really wanted to be a mother, like, you know, to birth a human being. And then like letting go of the mother archetype was a big deal for me. And I remember going through a depression. And I didn't even know I was going through a depression because I'm so functional even when I'm depressed. Like I function at a high level. And then somebody, my best friend said to me, "Do you realize you are depressed?" I'm like, "Oh, you are right."
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I think those are the things. Like for me, resilience now is acceptance, almost like acceptance of what are the limitations of my body, what are the limitations of what I can and cannot do, and also making different choices. I think before, I remember in my 20s and my 30s, I would fight any fight. I was just this warrior goddess that was going after everything. Like anybody just said something. In fact, like my one of my partners said that he met me before he met me, he heard about me. Because I was that person that apparently went to parties and schooled everybody about you know the things that they said and they couldn't say. So that was, and then in my 40s, I think becoming a little bit more measured. I think now I feel I'm more in touch with my softness, a feminine aspect of myself, which I think, like the irony is, right, like even growing up and being gendered as a woman, I don't think I grew up very feminine, honestly. Like I embodied a lot of masculine characteristics. Even in my family, I think I am more in terms of those traditional masculine roles. Like I'm somebody that everybody will come to and say, "This is what's happening. What are we gonna do?" You know. But I suppose like now it's more nuanced, though those traditional roles. But I think in those times it was very distinct. Like, and so for me, my feminine characteristics is sitting back and allowing other people to do things and just kind of like not jumping in to fix.
Yeah,
because
you're.
Yeah, and so for me that's kind of my resilience now, is kind of creating more space for that aspect of myself where I ask for help, where I have to ask for help. That's a weakness that I still need to work on. So that's for me, like, you know, what it means right now, and it's changing all the time. Like, ask me next year, and I might give you a different answer.
I'm gonna revert back to this conversation just because you said so. So what does it feel to ask for help now? Because I can tell that you are definitely in touch with your independence, and you made your way with your independence, and you carved this path for yourself with the people that contributed along the way. So what is it like receiving help in parts of your life where you didn't accept help?
I'm not gonna say I'm perfect. I think I'm probably 30%.
That's good enough for me.
30%, like.
That's good enough for me.
It really takes. I think like now I'm willing to say I don't have to do everything, right? And then saying, okay, what are the parts that I can bring others into, and then I just invite people in, and people are either willing to step into that or they're not. Like I also don't have an attachment that somebody will say yes if you ask for help.
Yeah.
Because I think, you know, I'm sure we all know this. We grow up in families where everybody is struggling with their own stuff. And so when you ask somebody for help, it's not necessarily always true that they can extend the help that you may need. I mean, I think in that regard, like the biggest fear, I think, that is losing my independence completely. So I think I invest in relationships that I know would be able to provide me care one day if I can't do it for myself. So like I have this one nephew of mine, like he's 11, and I feel like he's my best friend. Like because he, like every night we on the phone, and he calls me, doesn't matter where I am in the world, and we do his homework together. And then every morning 6:30 he wakes me up, and I have to watch him get dressed, and we have these like, what are we talking about this morning? And so I think investing in those kind of relationships, you know, that like my nephews and my niece are the relationships that I invest in, because I think that at some point, yeah, like they are gonna have to take care of me whether I like it or not.
Yeah, we have to take care of each other.
Yes, absolutely. And I think they've already said that, listen, one day, like, you know, can you come and live by us? I'm like, no. I like living on my own.
So we're gonna try and make their way to you very soon.
No, but I think like the point that they're making is they are basically saying, we see what you do, we see who you are to us, and we want to do that for you one day. And so I think like accepting that and realizing that that might happen is also a good thing, you know, like it's kind of accepting the limitations of, like there are these limitations that are not as far away as they were like maybe 20 years ago.
That is so beautiful. I would love to have an auntie like you. Actually, no, you're my aunt now. I'm adopting you. That's
can adopt me. I'm a really good aunt.
I believe that, because wow, that is honestly the sweetest thing, to have that relationship daily is
and I mean, I think it's like with them, I taught them, I said to them, when you were babies, when you were children, I invested in the relationship, but now when you guys have phones, you need to kind of reciprocate. And now they each one, like I said to him, because he was the one that I spoke the least to, I said, can you just call me once a week? But then he's an extreme person like me. He calls every day now. But sometimes I'm like,
tell me to do something, I'm gonna do it every day.
Yeah, but that's because that he's a child of routine. So he needs a routine, and I know that about him. But yeah, so I think those are the things about resilience. It's I think at the heart of it is self-acceptance.
It is.
But I think the other piece is not to forget you exist within a system. And I guess like the piece that both of us are saying is, how do you kind of make sure that the system doesn't define, you know, how it is that you show up for your own well-being and your own continued well-being within the context that you're living in. I think for me that's important. It's not to give the system all the power, but it's to acknowledge the system does exist. The system does define a lot of what is available. And also the system, like a lot of people are just kind of dancing to the tune of the system, right? And I think that as long as you can see that, you can make different choices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's power in choice.
Yeah, and don't try to change the system. Like, you can change the system, but that's like another kind of project on its own. Like, you know,
it's gonna take years to get to the end of changing that project.
But I think what I love now is that more of us are having these kind of conversations, right? More of us are thinking about it, and we should be thinking about it, because I guess that's one of the gifts of COVID. Like it made us see that we were so interconnected. All of us were the same in front of COVID. COVID didn't kind of differentiate. There were still kind of these other parameters, but I think it made us more aware to cherish what it is that we can, but also to cherish ourselves. I think that's the most important. So my advice to you,
please give me advice.
I think you're doing great. So keep doing that.
Thank you.
Keep on having the conversation, like what parts are you and what parts are imposed. And then take the time that you need to recover. That's the thing that I think, and just rest. Like actually, like my niece once said this to me. Like she was 7 years old at the time. I remember I was complaining to her. I was like, yeah, I'm so tired. And she's like, yeah, it's because you work so much. And I said to her, well, should I work less? She's like, no, just rest more. And I was like, a 7-year-old telling you something so simple.
Wow.
I was like, oh, and I think now, like I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, and I said to her, actually, you need to force yourself to rest. Like that, there's no other kind of like, most of us are going and with gadgets and everything, nobody's resting anymore. So
I received that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Muhadi.
Thank you.
This was a great conversation. I feel like I could go for days with you.
No, we will go for days. We are going to go for days. That is it. Chats and chat.
That was great. Thank you for joining us.